You think you know castles? Think again. Behind stone walls lurked traps so cruel and clever they'd terrify even modern soldiers. Medieval castle floors weren't just stone slabs you walked on. They were death traps waiting to swallow you whole. Builders designed trapdoor floors that looked completely normal until someone stepped on them with enough weight. Then, down you went. These weren't your typical basement entrances either. We're talking about hinged sections of flooring that would swing open faster than you could say, "Help." 1 second, you're walking across what looks like solid stone or wooden planks. The next, you're plummeting into a dungeon, spike-filled pit, or water chamber designed to drown you slowly. The really expensive castles didn't mess around with cheap materials. They used iron construction for their premium trapdoors, making them nearly invisible to unsuspecting visitors. You couldn't spot the difference between real flooring and a death trap unless you knew exactly what to look for. But here's the thing that made these floors truly terrifying. Only people who lived in the castle knew where they were located. Every servant, guard, and family member had to memorize a mental map of safe walking paths. One wrong step by an outsider meant certain doom. Castle guests learned quickly to follow their hosts very carefully. Speaking of following paths, even the walkways beneath your feet held their own deadly surprises. Those trapdoors were just the beginning. Castle builders had another nasty surprise waiting beneath walkways and corridors. Hidden spike pits turned innocent-looking floors into death traps. Wooden boards covered deep holes lined with sharpened stakes, waiting for someone to step in the wrong place. The construction was brutal but brilliant. Builders would dig pits 8 to 12 feet deep, then hammer dozens of iron-tipped spikes into the bottom at various angles. No matter how you fell, something sharp was ready to greet you. Here's the twisted part. Medieval armor made these traps even deadlier. A knight in full chainmail couldn't exactly do gymnastics after plummeting into a pit. The weight dragged them down faster, and climbing out, nearly impossible with metal weighing you down and spikes blocking every handhold. Some spike pits served double duty as holding cells. Makes sense, right? Why waste a perfectly good hole in the ground? Guards could question prisoners right there in the pit, with those spikes serving as a constant reminder of what happened to uncooperative guests. The camouflage work was masterful. Thin wooden planks, scattered hay, even fake stone slabs hid these traps. Castle residents memorized safe paths like their lives depended on it, because they literally did. But even spike pits couldn't match the psychological terror of what lurked behind castle walls. Falling through a trapdoor was bad enough, but medieval castle builders had an even nastier surprise waiting. Secret moats would appear out of nowhere, turning what looked like solid ground into a watery death trap. These weren't your typical castle moats sitting outside the walls for everyone to see. Castle designers were absolutely ruthless about placement. They'd build hidden water traps right behind gateways, under walkways, and even inside courtyards where attackers felt safe. The water looked shallow from above, but appearances were deceiving. Most drowning moats were deliberately dug deep enough to be over a man's head. Here's where it gets really twisted. Medieval armor weighed between 40 to 60 pounds. That's like strapping a heavy backpack to your chest and trying to swim. Once a fully armored knight hit the water, he was basically a human anchor. The metal plates that protected him in battle became his death sentence. But wait, there's more nastiness to uncover. Castle builders would install underwater barriers and grates to block any desperate escape attempts. Some moats connected to underground channels that carried victims away from the castle entirely. These weren't just defensive measures. They were designed to make bodies disappear without a trace. Yet even drowning moats couldn't match the mechanical precision of what came next. Falling through a trapdoor was terrifying enough, but medieval castle builders weren't done with you yet. They had another nasty surprise waiting around the corner. Heavy wooden logs, some weighing hundreds of pounds, hung silently from castle ceilings and walls. These weren't decorative beams. They were death traps designed to swing down and crush anyone foolish enough to trigger them. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and attackers would dodge, too late and they'd already passed through. Castle engineers became masters of physics before physics was even a thing. They calculated weight, chain length, and swing speed with deadly precision. Most swinging log traps were positioned at choke points where enemies had to squeeze through narrow passages. Makes sense, right? No room to dodge when you're packed shoulder to shoulder with your fellow soldiers. The beauty of these traps lay in their simplicity. A hidden tripwire, a pressure plate, or even a defender pulling a lever could send massive logs hurtling through the air. Iron chains secured everything to stone walls, creating anchor points that could withstand tremendous force. But here's the clever part. Guards could reset most of these mechanisms. Unlike spike pits or collapsing floors, swinging logs didn't break after one use. The same trap could crush multiple waves of attackers throughout a siege. However, even these brutal devices weren't the deadliest feature built into castle walls. Those massive stone walls weren't just for show. Medieval castle builders carved thin, angled slits into their fortifications that looked innocent enough from the outside. But these arrow slits were deadly precise killing machines. The genius lay in their design. Defenders could aim and fire arrows through these narrow openings while staying almost completely protected. Meanwhile, attackers outside faced an impossible task, trying to shoot back through a target barely wider than a man's fist. Good luck hitting anything when you're dodging arrows yourself. Castle architects placed these slits at calculated heights and positions. They studied attack patterns and knew exactly where enemies would gather. The result? Overlapping fields of fire that turned courtyards into death traps. Step into the wrong spot, and arrows came at you from 3 different directions. But here's where it gets sneaky. Some arrow slits hid behind tapestries or decorative wall coverings inside the castle. Imagine being an intruder who thinks he's safe indoors, only to have arrows suddenly pierce through what looked like harmless wall decorations. The element of surprise made these hidden slits even deadlier than the obvious ones. Smart defenders could reload quickly and keep up sustained fire for hours. While attackers struggled to find cover in open courtyards, archers stayed comfortable and protected behind thick stone walls. However, arrows weren't the only liquid terror raining down on medieval invaders. Think you're having a bad day? Well, try being a medieval soldier charging through a castle gateway while someone dumps boiling oil on your head. Murder holes weren't just architectural features, they were execution chambers disguised as doorways. These weren't random gaps in the ceiling. Castle builders positioned murder holes with surgical precision above choke points where attackers had to bunch together. Narrow gateways became death traps. The moment invaders crowded underneath, defenders above unleashed liquid hell. Hot oil was the classic choice, but medieval defenders got creative with their ammunition. Boiling water worked just as well and cost way less. Some castles used molten lead when they really wanted to make a statement. Then there's the gross factor. Animal waste, rotting food, and buckets of sand all made effective projectiles. The timing had to be perfect. Defenders waited until the maximum number of enemies gathered below before releasing their payload. One well-timed drop could disable an entire assault team. Armor became a liability rather than protection. Hot liquid seeped through joints and gaps, causing horrific burns underneath. But here's the brilliant part. Murder holes could be refilled quickly during long sieges. Defenders maintained large cauldrons constantly heating, ready for the next wave of attackers. Makes sense, right? However, even murder holes had limitations when attackers found ways around them entirely. When attackers thought they'd made it past the castle's outer defenses, they were dead wrong. The gatehouse wasn't just one barrier, it was a death maze designed to chew up armies piece by piece. Here's how medieval architects turned a simple entrance into a nightmare. Multiple portcullises dropped down at different points, creating iron-barred prison cells with enemies trapped inside. While attackers hammered desperately at the first gate, defenders could leisurely pick them off through arrow slits. Makes sense, right? Why kill them quickly when you can take your time? But the real genius was in the confusion factor. Gates didn't just go straight through. They zigzagged, forcing invaders to turn corners where surprise attacks waited. Heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bands created choke points every few feet. Each barrier had different lock mechanisms, some requiring keys, others operated by hidden levers only defenders knew about. The weird part is how gatehouses had secret side passages. While attackers struggled with the main route, castle defenders could slip around through hidden doors, appearing behind enemy lines like medieval ninjas. Some passages even led to upper floors where guards could rain down more punishment. And speaking of upper floors, those seemingly solid stone walls above held some truly creative surprises that made the gatehouse look friendly by comparison. Getting past the outer defenses was just the beginning of your nightmare. Castle builders loved messing with intruders' heads by creating doors that went absolutely nowhere. These weren't construction mistakes. They were deliberate psychological torture devices disguised as architecture. False doors looked completely legitimate from the outside. Heavy wooden planks, iron hinges, even fancy door knockers. But push one open and you might find yourself staring at solid stone wall, or worse, tumbling into a spike-filled pit. Some led into tiny chambers barely big enough for a person, where you get stuck like a medieval jack-in-the-box. Then there's the dead-end corridors that seem to stretch forever before hitting blank walls. Attackers would charge down these passages, weapons ready, only to slam face-first into stone. Meanwhile, castle defenders watched through hidden peepholes, probably having a good laugh. The really clever part? Hidden levers disguised as torch holders or decorative stones could trigger secret passages for defenders while keeping intruders trapped in the maze. Only people who lived in the castle knew which doors actually worked and which ones were elaborate pranks designed to kill you. Some dead ends even concealed small attack teams waiting to ambush confused invaders, but the real masterpiece of medieval trickery was still above their heads, waiting to drop death from overhead positions. Picture yourself scaling a castle wall, finally reaching what seems like safety near the top. You're catching your breath, maybe even feeling a bit proud of your climbing skills. That's when you notice the stone ledge jutting out above you looks oddly suspicious. Welcome to Machicolations, medieval architecture's nastiest surprise. These weren't decorative elements. They were purpose-built death dispensers. Castle builders created these stone overhangs with gaps between the supporting brackets, forming perfect holes for dropping things on unwanted visitors. Hot oil was the classic choice, but defenders got creative. Rocks, arrows, boiling water, or whatever nasty substances they could find went tumbling down through these openings. The genius lay in the positioning. Machicolations protected the most vulnerable spots: main gates, wall bases, anywhere attackers might cluster or try to breach defenses. Enemies couldn't see what was coming until it was too late. French castle builders perfected this technique in the 12th century, though earlier versions used wood instead of stone. The upgrade to stone made them permanent and fireproof. Soon, castles across Europe adopted these deadly architectural features. The word itself comes from Old French, essentially meaning crushing machine. Accurate name, really, but even Machicolations had their limitations compared to what awaited inside the castle itself, where every step forward became a calculated risk. Medieval architects knew something most people don't realize: stairs could be weapons. Castle designers built trap staircases that turned every step into potential death. The genius was in the details. Regular stairs followed predictable patterns, but trap stairs broke every rule. One step might be 8 inches high, the next 12, then suddenly 6. Your brain expects rhythm, but these stairs delivered chaos instead. Attackers charging upward would stumble, crash into each other, or lose their footing completely. But height wasn't the only trick. Some steps were deliberately weak, designed to collapse under weight. Others were angled wrong, causing feet to slip backward. The really nasty ones had sections that dropped away entirely, sending people tumbling into hidden cavities within the walls. Then there were the branching nightmares. Staircases would split unexpectedly, forcing attacking groups to divide their forces. One path led upward toward the main hall, another curved into a dead end where defenders waited with crossbows. Most attackers couldn't tell which route was real until it was too late. The psychological effect was brutal. Nothing breaks military confidence like watching your fellow soldiers trip and fall on what should be simple stairs. These weren't just architectural features. They were carefully engineered confusion machines that turned basic movement into a deadly puzzle. Speaking of deadly puzzles, medieval engineers had another trick that could cut off entire armies in seconds. Dropping the bridge behind attacking enemies wasn't just smart, it was downright evil. Medieval drawbridges operated on brilliant counterweight systems that let one person control massive wooden and iron structures. Here's the nasty part. Castle defenders would wait until attackers rushed across, then quickly raise the bridge, cutting off their escape route completely. The engineering was surprisingly sophisticated. Heavy counterweights, usually massive stone blocks, hung from chains and pulleys inside the gatehouse. When released, these weights did most of the heavy lifting. A single guard could trap an entire attacking force in seconds. Makes you wonder how many soldiers realized too late they just walked into a dead end. But wait, there's more to this trap than meets the eye. Some drawbridges were designed to drop attackers directly into moats or spike pits when raised too quickly. The sudden movement would send armored knights tumbling backward into whatever nasty surprise waited below. Talk about adding insult to injury. Then there were the fake drawbridges. These looked sturdy enough to support a cavalry charge, but would collapse under heavy weight, sending horses and riders plummeting into the moat. Castle builders weren't just architects, they were psychological warfare experts who understood that controlling movement meant controlling the battle. Speaking of controlling enemies, medieval architects had another trick up their sleeves. Hidden wall compartments throughout castles served multiple purposes beyond simple storage. Medieval castle builders weren't content with just dropping enemies into pits or crushing them with logs. They got creative with architecture itself, turning ordinary walls into Swiss cheese filled with deadly surprises. These weren't your typical storage closets. Wall compartments served multiple purposes that would make modern home organizers jealous. Defenders could grab fresh weapons mid-battle without running to distant armories. Smart, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Some compartments weren't meant for storage at all. Clever builders designed hollow spaces that concealed the actual mechanisms controlling other traps throughout the castle. Pull the wrong stone, and suddenly trapdoors across the courtyard would spring open, touch a seemingly decorative panel, and arrow slits would unleash volleys from unexpected angles. The construction required serious skill. Masons carved recesses into thick stone walls, then camouflaged access points with matching stonework or painted panels. Some used hinged stones that swung inward when pressed. Others employed sliding mechanisms that required specific pressure patterns to open. Well, castle thieves learned about these compartments the hard way. Many treasure hunters found themselves permanently joining the castle's collection when compartments snapped shut behind them. The weird part is that some of these locks could only be opened from the outside. But walls weren't the only places where medieval engineers hid their surprises. The floors beneath defenders' feet held even more sinister secrets. Falling through a trapdoor was bad enough, but medieval castle builders had an even nastier surprise waiting below. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were fully functional prison cells with their own deadly tricks. The moment someone dropped through, guards could slam the trapdoor shut above them. No climbing back up, no escape route. Just stone walls and the growing realization that things were about to get much worse. But here's where it gets really twisted. Some of these prison cells had their own trapdoors built into the floor. Guards would let prisoners think they'd found the worst of it, maybe even give them a day or two to settle in. Then, another lever, another drop, straight down into an even deeper pit. Castle designers loved this double trap system because it broke people mentally. The first fall was shocking. The second fall was devastating. Prisoners never knew if the ground beneath them was solid or if they'd plummet again without warning. Guards could access these cells through hidden passages, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Perfect for interrogations when you wanted someone completely off balance and terrified. The really clever castles disguised these floor prisons with thick rugs or wooden furniture on top. Guests walked over imprisoned enemies without ever knowing what lay beneath their feet. Of course, all these elaborate traps needed maintenance to keep working properly. Medieval castle builders faced a constant problem that would drive any modern engineer crazy. Build a trap that works once, and you've got exactly one shot before word spreads about your sneaky defenses. The solution? Traps that reset themselves automatically. Springs made from tempered steel and carefully balanced counterweights turned single-use surprises into renewable nightmares. When someone triggered a trap door, weighted pulleys would slowly pull it back into position over several hours. Makes sense, right? Well, the engineering behind these mechanisms was surprisingly sophisticated for the time period. Then there's the psychological angle that castle defenders absolutely loved exploiting. Attackers who survived the first encounter would warn their buddies about specific trap locations, but self-resetting systems meant those safe spots became dangerous again by morning. Nothing quite like stepping confidently over a trap door you watched someone else fall through yesterday only to discover it's armed and ready for round two. Some castles boasted networks of interconnected traps that could be activated from hidden control rooms. Guards pulled levers behind secret panels, triggering multiple mechanisms across different floors simultaneously. The maintenance alone must have been a full-time job, but the tactical advantage was undeniable. But even the cleverest mechanical traps couldn't match the raw psychological impact that castle designers discovered when they started playing mind games with their enemies. Medieval castle builders understood something crucial about human psychology. Fear of the unknown hits harder than actual danger. They crafted traps designed not just to kill, but to mess with attackers' minds completely. Take the screaming walls. Builders installed hollow chambers that amplified dying sounds throughout entire castle sections. One unlucky soldier triggers a spike pit, and his screams echo everywhere. Suddenly, every remaining attacker thinks traps lurk behind every stone. Brilliant, right? Then there's the fake blood rivers. Castle designers rigged systems to release animal blood from wall cracks when stepped on. Attackers see fresh blood seeping from stones and assume they're walking through a massacre zone. Most turned around immediately. But the weirdest part? Some castles used deliberate misdirection traps. These contraptions made loud noises but caused zero harm. A soldier steps on a trigger, hears terrifying grinding sounds, sees dust falling from ceiling, but nothing actually happens. The psychological damage was enormous, though. Word spread that the castle was cursed or haunted. Smart defenders even planted fake skeletons in obvious trap locations. Attackers found evidence of previous failed assaults and often retreated before fighting began. The reputation became the weapon itself. These mind games worked so well that many castles never faced serious attacks. Fear accomplished what walls and weapons couldn't. Medieval psychological warfare proved devastatingly effective through pure terror tactics.